Hello, everyone. I'm Pamela Marshall at the Wellness Radio TV and at the Wellness Radio TV podcast. As we continue our MLK Day celebration and observance of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. by talking to people all across the country, my guest for this segment is actually in New York. Emelina, thank you so much for stopping your day. It's cold there, huh?
It is. It's freezing. Oh my gosh. I'd much rather be down near you than up
Yeah,
here right now. But at least it's not snowing. All the snow melted. So we're getting a little bit of a break.
but it is January, and that's when it's supposed to be cold.
Yeah. Yeah.
Em-
I grew up in California, so I don't think I'll ever get used to the freezing cold.
Yeah, yeah. Emelina, as we are celebrating Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday, the man who stood in harm's way for everybody so that little black boys and little black girls could stand in harmony together. But Emelina, you're just by looking, you're a white person in America, but you're Jewish. In
No,
addition
no,
to,
no, I'm not Jewish.
you're not, I thought you
No,
were.
I know everyone always thinks I'm Jewish, but nope. My background is Polish and French, Basque though. And Basque has the Basque people have an interesting heritage. But anyways, go on. No
Yeah,
Jewish.
yeah, yeah. Okay, okay, okay. So white. I got that right. I
Yeah.
got that correct.
Yeah. That was pretty obvious.
And so many times there are white people who feel like celebrating MLK Day is not, they take the day off work, but they don't see it as a day that they should be celebrating.
Mm,
Why do you think you have decided that it's a day that you celebrate and encourage other white people to do the same?
mm. That's a really interesting question, and I'm so glad you're asking it. And by the way, let me say I'm humbled that you invited me on today, actually, because I really appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation with you. Um, I think there's definitely a lot of like white man guilt, that white person guilt that comes into it, which white people don't really know how to deal with. And I think this really stems from um, a fear and misunderstanding and probably apathy, of not doing the research, or not research is the wrong word, understanding our ancestors and and the history of our land and our people. Like, yes, we know about the civil rights movement, and yes, we know about Martin Luther King, but I think for a lot of white people, we have not reconciled, if I could speak for, I don't know, for what I think, is that we haven't reconciled the fact of, and I'm not sure a lot of Black people have either, actually, for that matter, reconciled the damage that has been done in this country, the blood that has stained our land, and someone said to me, which was very poignant. She said, why do white people appropriate a lot of the African culture? Why don't they get their own? Why don't they do their own ancestral work? Because, doing ancestral work is so big in the African culture,
Mhm.
and that's very prominent. And for white people, it's not. We don't do a lot of digging. There's the 23andMe DNA testing, but we don't. So we know where our ancestors come from, but there isn't a lot of the psychological work, the understanding of who these people were, and then again, reconciling it into our own lives. So for instance, in my lineage, I have an ancestor who proudly hung a Confederate flag. And then I also have on another side an ancestor who helped usher Jews, to safety during World War II. So, there's it's hard to reconcile, especially for a culture, the white culture, that doesn't promote or support doing that reconciliation. And so I think the talking about it, that's why I'm so grateful to have this opportunity to talk about it and to really encourage people to look at that and to reconcile it for themselves, because I do think it's a personal reconciliation and journey, and there's a lot of lip service that gets done, especially on Martin Luther King Jr. Day. And, for in February for African American month, But, a friend of mine says, why 1 month? Isn't every day a celebration of who we are, And actually, my friend wrote this great article in Rolling Out, which I'll post the link to, actually.
Please do.
Maybe afterwards. Oh, if I can figure out how to do it. Yeah, I'll probably do it afterwards. But anyways, and one of the things he says is that there's this fairy tale that we're taught in schools now about Martin Luther King Jr. And that includes Black people, white people and Black people. We're taught this fairy tale. And, we don't hear about as far as the history goes in the civil rights movement, we hear less about like the police brutality and, a lot of the Jim Crow. If the Jim Crow was like the big bad wolf, of the fairy tale, and the, assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., who I certainly learned about, but it's true that it is kind of turned into this like fairy tale. The education of Martin Luther King Jr. is really focused around what he stood for, equality and all of these positive things, which is great and wonderful. And I do think we should celebrate that, but we cannot forget, and we need to remember that a huge part of that story is the assassination, the murder, the whites only, the Jim Crow South, and all of those laws, and how that was embedded in our government. That's also something like the government doesn't take responsibility. We're not taught that government.
Yeah. Interesting. You just spoke for about 6 minutes. No. And there's 6 shows that you just opened up. White man guilt.
Mm-hmm.
If you celebrate Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., then you have to acknowledge all of those things that brought us to the place of why we're celebrating this man.
Exactly.
And the hatred that existed, because it is said that at the time of his assassination, he was one of the most hated men in America by Black and white people, Black people who were under the propaganda that he's moving us too fast. Like wrong, there's a good time for wrong, and there's a wrong time for right is the narrative. And so the guilt that's hard for people to reconcile, and then to think of it as a fairy tale. You only talk about not the government's involvement in his assassination, the involvement of local government in Memphis that sent people home so that the law enforcement would not be there to protect him. Emelina, are there any conversations at all, like off the stage? Emelina has written a book, or is writing a book, on Another Way. Her focus is working with artists on looking at their journey and how do you do it another way. And so that's why I said that off-stage comment. What are the conversations? What do white people talk about when they talk about Dr. King? Or is there any conversation at all?
Well, I think it does focus on equality, leveling the playing field. It's less about justice, I think. I mean, nowadays justice is kind of a hot buzzword. So certainly with the Black Lives Matter movement, I think there's definitely more about that. But I do think that people tend to focus on all of the things that they can relate to, right? So white people can relate to these ideas of equality, feminism or the feminist movement, this idea of equality. So I think maybe that's something that people cling to. But what's not being talked about, I think, and this is what my book is about, doing the work of bridging this divide really between, specifically when I work with artists, I'm trying to bridge the divide between arts and business, but it's really about reconciling. You have to, in order to find that balance, you have to go inside and you have to reconcile. And part of going inside and finding your own alignment is reconciling your past. And your past as a white person involves the oppression, systematic oppression of non-white people, and that is something that's really hard to reconcile. And I think that we cannot be, in many ways, we cannot be complete people and live sustainably until we have done really the work of our ancestors, like looking at that line and then figuring out where we stand today, you know, and whether you look at it as a weight or a however you reconcile it, we do need to recognize that our ancestors played a part in and that has participated in all of this.
And I think that that
And
is
I
the
think,
big,
oh, are you still there?
yeah, can you hear me?
Great. Yes, yes.
Okay. I think that's the biggest pushback. I've even had some classmates who don't want me to post the stories, the interviews that I do on the Timbuktu Report. And I will tell you, I have been surprised because I thought they were my friends.
Mm.
But that only goes so far, apparently. And it is difficult. But I think that if we would, I think that's the healing part for this
Yes, I
country.
was just going to say that. It is because the fear, I think there's a fear, white people push back because they don't want to take the responsibility of their ancestors. And that is a hard thing to do, but I think it's kind of we carry that in us. Like, it was really hard for me to reconcile the fact that I have racist tendencies in my DNA, right? So whether I on a spiritual level resonate with that, I do carry it because of my ancestors. And that is something that I may have to work harder to overcome. I may have to find the patience and forgiveness of myself first for having that in me, you know, and I don't know what the work is to reconcile it. I think it's all personal for each individual person, but I think the pushback you get comes from the fear of doing that because white people don't grow up in a culture of where we look back, for better or worse. In fact, I think it's worse. But we don't look back and we don't look at those wounds. And so all of a sudden, not only are we healing our own personal wounds in this life today, but we have a lot of wounds from our history to heal. And we don't talk about that as much. And we don't learn it in school. We're not being, in fact, we're being taught the exact opposite. So we have a lot to overcome. And it's scary for a lot of people, but I'm hoping conversations like this, again, can like break down those divides and people will just start doing the work. I mean, it's not sustainable to not do it. We just, at some point we need to forgive and choose love.
Emelina is an author, a producer in New York, and we're talking about the celebration, Dr. Martin Luther King Day celebration, from the perspective of how white people view it. And when you talk about not being afraid to do the work, talk about that, explain that fear.
It's shadow work is what it is, I think, because I think the wounds of our ancestors or of the history of in our land, those wounds are embedded in the shadows because we don't talk about them, as I said, and we're not taught about it in school. And so it requires sitting into those shadows. And it is symptomatic of Western culture to always go to what feels good. I mean, this is what technology is all about, right? We continue innovating so that we can find more and more ways to streamline efficiency and to make things easier for us. So instead of leaning into the hard work, we're always looking for the easy answer, the easy way out, and even in the spiritual movement, if you will, if you want to call it that, where now people are starting to be more spiritual, you've got a whole segment of spiritual leaders who are all about positive thinking, stay focused on the positive. I think it's, even that is like away from the shadow work. It's like, if you can stay positive and focused on what you want, then you will achieve that. But what that does is it puts blinders on to all of the icky stuff, the shadows that you cannot move forward if you don't heal those shadows. But I think that what happens is that people will just find new ways to make it easier and easier. So like when that shadow stuff prevents you from getting what you want, people will just find another way to bypass it as opposed to actually leaning into it. It's also ego work. Oh my gosh, it's totally ego work, because it is our ego that is driving the fear.
So we're talking about the fear that white people have of recognizing things that took place in the case of Dr. Martin Luther King Day, and sometimes, and in most cases, don't even feel like it's a day that they should celebrate, even though it's very clear that Dr. Martin Luther King was working for poor people, and there are definitely poor white people in America. And talk about people in the shadows. There are those who think that the only poor people in America are Black people.
Mhm.
Well, go to the Appalachians. I'm from Tennessee. Go to Virginia. Go to Kentucky. I mean, in many places, there are poor people everywhere.
Mhm, mhm.
So to not acknowledge that this man was killed because he was trying to stand up and stand in the gap for those who could not for themselves. Why is that a fear?
Yeah, well, because everything he died for, right? That's what the fear is. So, like, by acknowledging all of that, you acknowledge all the wrongs and all of the everything he was fighting against. Basically, that's what's the scary part of it is. And I think the fairy tale that we live now is kind of like pushing that all to the side. We don't want to look at the like police brutality, the fact that he was like wiretapped, right, and being followed and being harassed himself. That's the stuff that is like, to think that that would happen to another human being is scary, and whether they're white or Black. And so I think that's why, but I think but Black people carry that. It's more prevalent because it still happens and they're still seeing it in their community.
Yeah.
And white people don't have to see it in some ways. I mean, they don't look because they're afraid of it, because they can't take it on, because I think they feel like they have to take on the weight. I mean, and I don't know, I really can't speak for anyone other than me, but I know for me, if I ever had a hesitation to it, I think it was because it feels like I have to take on the weight of all of those white people who did that. And that's not something I relate to, because I certainly would. I mean, my work is about ending the exploitation of artists of every color, but exploitation in general is something that I think disproportionately, focuses on people of color, or minorities, which people of color aren't even in a minority anymore, but that was just a convenient way to speak about them. And so it's a lot to take on when we haven't reconciled it. Like, I couldn't, when I found out that there was like this Confederate soldier. He wasn't a soldier, but he was this, I guess, I don't know much about him. I probably should find out more about him, actually. But, in my family line, somebody who was proudly sporting this Confederate flag, that's hard for me to accept, because I wouldn't do that. And I don't even want to associate with people who do that. So it's really hard to acknowledge and accept that I carry that, and that it is in my DNA, like I said. So it does have, I can't deny that there is a lens that I see through. I see things maybe like rosy colored because of the color of my skin, because of my experience, because of my perception, and it is, in some ways, it is a hurdle, I think, to overcome, because I'm particularly interested in finding balance and equality. So I have to pause sometimes. And I don't want to think that, and know that my perspective is not the only perspective. For me, I think that's what it's about. Yeah. It's not even like I can't understand it because I haven't been through it, but I can know that there are other ways of experiencing it, and they're not all as easy, maybe, as it was for me.
When you talk about the fear, it's been said that many times white people are fearful of acknowledging the past of this country because they think Black people are going to, in turn, treat them the way they've treated Black people.
Oh, interesting. I'm not sure that would be so bad. I mean, so it would balance things out a little bit, but
yeah. I think though, as I look at the African in America, we have probably been the most forgiving people on the planet.
Mm, mm, mhm,
And
mm,
to think that if Black people really wanted to do really, really bad stuff, it could have already been done.
mm.
But it's not in our DNA to do
Right,
that. And I wish white people would understand we don't want to punch you.
right.
We want to embrace you and help lift you up. I don't want to blame you, Emelina.
Right.
I, I appreciate you saying what you're saying because I want you to heal. Because as you heal, I also heal.
Mm, mm,
And, a house divided can't stand, right?
right.
So as long as we're divided, then America is divided.
Yeah.
And when you look at a sore, just because you put a pretty band-aid on it does not make the infection go away. You got to get the infection out before the healing starts to take place. Otherwise, it keeps eating. And I think that's what we're seeing in the United States of America,
Mhm.
unfortunately. Emelina, I think about when I integrated the school in my community, and a little white boy turned the fishbowl over on my head. And I don't know where he is today. I'm not mad at him. He may still be mad because I came in his classroom.
Mm,
Um, but we represent um, a, a hope. I wish my generation, your generation, represented hope for America, and that Dr. Martin Luther King's contributions and the blood that he shed on that balcony at Lorraine Motel in Memphis would mean more than just a parade. It
mm,
mean more than a day that some people just take off work and they don't care about anything except they get the day off.
right.
Okay, I didn't ask a question.
Well, one thing I will say, because you talk about how like maybe white people feel threatened by Black people, is kind of what you were saying. One thing I will say is that the way of healing, I think there's different ways to heal across different cultures, and also, again, on an individual level, people heal differently. So I know for me in my journey, and learning more about the Black experience in America. Martin Luther King Jr. Day is obviously just one day as an opportunity. That's an opportunity to learn about it, but there's so much more than one day. But for me, it helps to talk. I like to talk about it. I really like talking about it because to me, we can diffuse that tension, that fear you're talking about, if we talk about it, and
Hmm.
but even I am sometimes hesitant to talk about it because and even during Black Lives Matter, it kind of, there was a thing that a lot of Black people were like, I don't want to educate you. It's not my responsibility to educate you as a white person. You go out and educate yourself. We've had to live it. So the last thing we want to do is sit here and educate you while and for me that was really hard because I was like, well, okay, I can go back and I can do the research, but like my healing process is talking, and I don't want to talk to but I would rather go straight to the source personally. Like if me talking with a bunch of white people about the Black people experience seems inauthentic, and it doesn't
Hmm.
really help me. So that was one thing that I found particular. I mean, although I understand it, but I think at the heart of a lot of the tensions is cultural difference because in African culture you have this storytelling tradition which I really love and I really resonate. I may have been African in a previous life, I'm not sure, but I have to say that that's something I really respect, and that is not something we have in white America. Certainly we have textbooks and we have this like whitewashed version of history which has been told by wealthy individuals who are controlling the narrative of our future. And then when you get down to individual, like in African culture, it's a leisure gathering. You tell stories and it's part of the culture. We don't do that in white America. I wish we did. There's other things that we do for better or worse. But I think that I would love to see, I think that's where we kind of need to bridge the divide is this. I think the tensions can be bridged with like storytelling and through, right?
Right. And, you say you may have been African. Well, apparently we all were,
Well, right.
because of the oldest skeletal remains was found in Africa.
Mm.
And wouldn't that just be a beautiful thing if we would just drop all this other stuff?
Yes.
And as the Beatles said, and as the scripture says before the Beatles, give peace a chance.
Yes.
What about just being at peace?
Yes. I love that, and I have to say, I have to quote, I would be remiss to not quote Bayo Akomolafe. I'm not sure if you know him. He's well, I call him a philosopher, but he calls himself a recovering academic, even though he's still in the world of academia. But anyways, he has he had a class, which it was called We Will Dance with the Mountains. And it was based off of the Vunja dance in Africa. And so it was about exploring the cracks of where we are in our lives. And one of the things he did is he defined Blackness as the refusal of capture. And that is not limited to people of a darker complexion. And so in some of the conversations I had that came out of that class, I kind of came up with this idea of defining whiteness as the exploitation of power, which is not limited to people of a lighter complexion, but I like these two ideas because they speak to our histories without condemning a people. It's not condemning the people, because obviously there are people who exploit power and there are people who are refusing to be captured. You know what I mean? But I feel like it was a nice way to kind of bring us to bridge the divide, and my friend who wrote the article for Rolling Out, he says that white people like to talk about these things when they are comfortable and we can relate to us. And again, it's bypassing the uncomfortable part. And I certainly do not mean to do that at all, because I think that uncomfortable part is part of it. That's what we were doing in the classes. That's what Vunja is all about, sitting in the cracks and celebrating the cracks, which is where, we don't fit. It's the slave ship, right? It's the metaphor of the slave ship where, is not a happy place to be, but there are, moments of life that can be celebrated in that. And again, as a metaphor, that's something that speaks to me, even though I've never experienced that and I don't have that in my line. And just another thing I wanted to say based off of what you were saying was that, someone also said to me in that class, they were like, why are white people always stealing, this idea of like the Yoruba religion, like, why can't they just kind of get their own? I mean, I guess we have Christianity if you want, but her ultimate point was like, why don't you do the ancestral work and figure out where your origins are? And when I started to do that, what I realized was, thanks to, you sent me a speech by Dr. John Henry Clark, who was talking about how if you go back to the beginnings of white people, because, like the Greeks and the Romans, right after the Egyptians, they were stealing from the Egyptians. So again, like whiteness has in so many ways meant stealing from other people, and stealing is a harsh word. Maybe borrowing. I mean, I'm not sure. I can't say there was always malicious intent behind that, but it makes it very hard, I think, for white people to own their own, because so much does come back. So many of the things, like, for instance, that I resonate with and I relate to does kind of come from the African culture. And does that mean I can't celebrate, like Vunja, for instance? Does that mean I can't celebrate that because I'm not Black? I don't know. I think that's a really hard question to answer.
I don't think it means that you can't. I think that our tent is really big, and we welcome. And I think that is part of who we are. And it's been the good and it's been the downfall in trusting. As there have been people who've talked about,
Yes.
once we desegregated schools. I spoke to a woman who's 94 years old. She's a retired educator. And she said, we trusted that they were going to do the right thing with our children. And now we see what has happened. Graduation rate is low. Academically, Black children are doing worse than they were doing before schools were desegregated. But we are trusting.
Mhm.
And I think what you pointed out was a mindset. Because, see, I can only see in you, Emelina, what's already in me.
Oh, beautiful. Yes. That comes from the Bible.
Yeah. And so I think that if my white brothers and sisters would rest in that fact, what you're imposing on me are your thoughts.
Mm.
It doesn't mean that's who I am. That means that those are your thoughts. So, in another group that we were in, we talked about being 100% responsible for who we are and our thoughts and our actions. Because, if we're not doing anything to help heal,
Mm.
then the work is tarnished.
Mm. And we can't heal ourselves if we can't and
Mm.
forget. And if speaking of forgiveness, if we can't forgive other people, then how can we forgive ourselves?
Right.
Yeah.
Emelina in New York, she's an author. There is another way. She works with artists. And during this time of COVID, we haven't checked even touched that subject of the arts and COVID and how's New York doing?
Well, it's probably too blanket a statement to say more of the same, but that's what it
Okay.
feels like a little bit. I mean, to me, what it feels like in the art scenes is that it's gotten more individualized, for lack of better words. It's become splintered in not a bad way, actually. I think in a way that's probably long overdue, less concentrated, right? So, like for instance, just to use theater, because theater is kind of the easiest example of this. Theater used to be very concentrated, like Broadway was the thing. And it feels now post-pandemic that people kind of lost interest in Broadway. I'm sorry to all of my Broadway friends, but Broadway's still there, and I'm sure they will find their relevance once more. I think they're kind of struggling with that right now.
Find their way.
What?
Find their way.
I think they will find another way,
Another
whether
way.
it's on Broadway or not. But what I think is an awesome thing is that it's become decentralized. So it's not just New York. We've got a great things happening in theater in Atlanta, and in San Francisco and all over the place. People, because thanks to being virtual, people have been able to network easier, and from a producer's point of view, we're like, we're not stuck to a limited pool as far as casting goes. In New York, we can now use actors from all over the world, whether they're union or not to bash the union, but the union in theater certainly has its own work to do. But all of a sudden it's become more like an equal playing field, which I think is positive. And you've got people who are, instead of trying to work their whole lives to get up into Broadway, which was so concentrated, and from just to stay on topic, we could say it's controlled by white people, which is true for the most part. As with industry, the higher up you get, the more kind of white people you see, and the fewer non-whites you see. So what I think is great, though, is that the people are saying, no, I don't need to do that. I can do that in whatever state I'm in, wherever I am. I can produce a reading online or a virtual show. I can use actors, professional talent from around the world, and I can get exposure for that and meet people. And I don't need Broadway. And I think that's really positive. And I think to a certain extent that's happening in every arts industry.
And I think in this industry, I certainly would not have even thought of interviewing you today about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday celebration had we not been exposed to these tools of StreamYard and Zoom. And I really think that has been a positive. And I really appreciate you, Emelina, for your vulnerability, for you sharing and for you prefacing that, I'm not trying to speak for all white people, but this is your perspective, and I really do appreciate that. And it probably rings true with more people than you think. So thank you very much.
Thank you again. I really appreciate you holding the space for this conversation and for doing it, because sometimes I am at a loss into how I can, do something. So it feels really good to be able to talk about it. Thank you.
You
And
are
thank
so
you.
welcome. Say again.
I said, and thank you for all all the podcasts you do. I mean, I see you on here all the time in your Timbuktu report. I think those are really important conversations that need to be had.
Thank you. Thank you. Everybody, thank you so much for watching this segment. We've been doing this Emelina Like Network. We've been covering MLK Day all day long. And I have some other interviews scheduled. There's a woman who actually marched with Dr. King when she was 13 years old and actually held his hand.
Oh,
I know.
I love that. I'm
I'm
going to tune
so
into that one.
Thank you. Thank you. And I wanted to bring other perspectives of Dr. Martin Luther King Day. And, there's real work that needs to be done, and it has to be done the other 364 days of the year, not just on this one day when we have a parade, have a choir sing, have somebody speak. The real work happens in these kind of conversations. And I hope we can have more of them, Emelina.
Anytime. Yes, me too.
Thank you. Everybody, thank you so much for joining me for this segment. We'll be back shortly with more conversations about healing during this Dr. Martin Luther King Day celebration 2022. I'm Pamela Marshall at the Wellness Radio TV and at the Wellness Radio TV podcast. Remember, there is healing at the well.